Hello, good morning. Today I'd like to tell you about an absolutely outstanding man. Although many who knew him would probably say that he was an outstanding bore or an outstanding asshole. That's the impression that he left on many. But I'd like to outline a few facts in his life to help you understand why he could behave in this way and why his music is so fascinating. My name is Mateusz Rusowicz, and you're watching Mrus Talks. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to some of my friends who encouraged me to make the video in English finally, because I have a Polish channel, but okay, I will just maybe go on. Thanks, guys. Ludwig van Beethoven was an absolutely extraordinary figure and unfortunately shaped by very tragic events in his life. I'll outline a few of them, but first let's consider what Europe was like at the time so that we would be more aware of the world he lived in. It was a time when the entire continent was expecting incredible upheavals. The Great Revolution in France swept away the monarchy. Then the Napoleonic Wars turned the whole of Europe into a terrain of conflict. And finally, the Congress of Vienna pretended that all of this just didn't happen. And that was more or less under these circumstances that Ludwig was born. Before the revolution, in a small town of Bonn, near the French border. When his father, a well-known drunk, heard that Leopold Mozart was touring Europe with his prodigy son Wolfgang, and saw that Ludwig also had musical talent, he immediately thought, "That's a great business plan." So every day, he came from work really late, but that didn't stop him from waking up his son to practice many hours at night. When Ludwig managed to steal a few minutes from himself to improvise his own melodies, his father immediately shouted at him for wasting time and not practicing properly. This is absolutely amazing. Because if I was sitting at this piano, that would arouse a hatred for music for the rest of my life. And Beethoven? He was looking every day for those few minutes of inspiration to create his own music. And then comes the first blow. His mother, the one who cared for him the most, dies. One can completely break down. But Beethoven does something different. From that moment on, it is him who becomes the primarily supporter of the family, because his father has completely disappeared in the bottle. It is Ludwig who takes over his father's paycheck and still works himself to support everyone. And after a few years, his father also dies. Apparently, Elector, the local ruler, was informed by the situation, and he was greatly saddened by the news, saying that it was a black day for the budget, as the revenue from the sales of alcohol would drop significantly. Such was Ludwig's father's reputation. But young Ludwig was free and could finally leave. And to leave meant only one thing: to go to Vienna. Vienna was not just any city in those days, it was the epicenter of music in Europe. And Vienna was especially home to one man, Joseph Haydn. He was the Lord God of music at that time. There is no better address in the whole world. And Ludwig arrives full of hope in Vienna and then crashes into a wall because the meeting with Haydn was a disaster. Years later, Ludwig said that he had learned nothing from Haydn. We don't know really what happened then at this meeting, but it's a disaster. So what can be done now? Now that's simple. You just need to pack your things and go back home. But there's no home. Bonn is occupied by the French. Beethoven has nowhere to go back to. He is alone in a foreign city and has to start all over again. And so he does. He slowly, step by step, joins the Viennese ward, and then the greatest tragedy of his life befalls him. As you all know, he becomes more and more deaf, and the doctors leave no illusion. He will be deaf completely. He has worked all his life, practiced late at nights, supported his family with his music, and now he will be deaf. I think it would have broken me completely. He tries to commit suicide, but he turns all of those incredible feelings into a very characteristic reaction for him: rebellion. This rebellion and disagreement with conditions other than his own is brilliantly illustrated by the anecdote of how he went to see one of his greatest patrons, Duke Lichnowsky, and quarreled with him. And I mean, he was quarreling with rather everyone, but this quarrel was very strong, was a very characteristic one. It was supposedly his last visit to Lichnowsky's. He ran down the staircase, knocked down the Duke's bust, which shattered into thousands of pieces, and he shouted, "There have been many Dukes, but there's only one Beethoven." His second way of dealing with crises was titanic work. His life was a complete chaos. It's the world's biggest mess. It's an eternal teenager's room. In the midst of that all, he would find a few hours every day to compose, which was probably the only constant in his life, because he would move several times a year, because just others would throw him out. He was unbearable, and living with him was a nightmare. A very important document comes from this period when he was going deaf, the Heiligenstadt Testament, in which he admits to his friends that he was going deaf and that he have had suicidal thoughts. But he also writes the only thing that keeps me alive is my music, which I have to show to the world. This is turning the whole thinking about music upside down. In the past, really prominent composers like Mozart, like Bach, composed for a reason. They composed because there would be a ball, because there would be a mass, a dinner, a meeting, whatever. Nobody composed music to change people. And that is what Beethoven does. He believes that music is the most important of arts because it can speak directly to the heart of the listener and change that heart. He believes that he is the leader of that change, and he has the music within him that has such a power to change society. And if we stop now, gather all the information, all that I have said, and put together, we will have the silhouette of the composer. We see a man really tightly encased in various defense mechanisms, such as rudeness or arrogance. We see that this is all a shell to prevent him from getting hurt again, because he has simply taken too many blows in his life already. And you know, it's quite remarkable that the Heiligenstadt Testament basically opens with a sentence in which he says that he feels great love for people every day. Do you guys understand that? A man who behaves like that, who gets kicked out of his house because others just can't stand him? These are not just empty words that he writes. There's another anecdote when, at the premiere of one of his symphonies, he insisted on conducting even though he was already completely deaf. Of course, it was a complete disaster. The musicians got lost, played in different places, and he heard nothing. One of the performers had to get up to interrupt, and it just didn't make any sense. The orchestra played again, without him. And Beethoven couldn't stand it. He ran out of the theater, ran to his flat, and simply cried like a baby. A grown man was sobbing in his pillow. He couldn't bear the humiliation, and he couldn't survive the fact that the music he believed in so much, the music that was supposed to have such an immense power, was rejected. There were also bright sides to his life, of course, such as when he found out that he could get a job outside of Vienna. And it was an unusual situation in the whole history of Europe, because it's probably the first time in history of Europe when the aristocracy of Vienna realized that they could not let Beethoven go. He was a national asset, a pillar of culture. They decided to pay him a salary for the rest of his life. And the only condition was that he just has to stay in Vienna. And finally, I wanted to talk to you about one of his works, especially. Quite important, because in it, he includes his message. We can see that he carries this message all his life. We can find it from the notebooks from Bonn. What do you think is the message of such a man? Life is hard, but you have to fight. Or maybe it's you will encounter tragedies, but clench your teeth and go on. Or maybe if you know what are you living for, you will achieve it. No, none of these things. Beethoven in his 9th Symphony introduces a choir that sings Friedrich Schiller's Ode to Joy, which says, "All men shall be brothers." Do you imagine it? He says, the French who beheaded others, the people who died at Moscow, the people who drowned at Leipzig, all men will be brothers. The Englishman, the Frenchman, the Austrian, they will be brothers. This is fascinating. You can find it in his music. You can really find it there. That's incredible. Okay guys, that's enough for today. If you liked the episode, please like it, share it, subscribe. And if you have some questions, I'd like to see your comments. Thank you. See you again soon.